Today I'm going to show you how to make an incredible hazelnut oat milk ice cream that I serve on my tasting menu, and I'd put money on being both the simplest and most delicious vegan ice cream that you will ever taste. I'm not afraid to make recipes complex when that gives you the best possible flavour, and you can see that in quite a lot of my work, but the brilliant thing with this recipe is just how great it is for only having basically 3 ingredients and 2 steps to making it. I'm going to get straight into showing you how to make the ice cream in 1 second, because I think that's what most people will have come here to see, but then I hope that maybe you'll stick around afterwards while I show you how I make some of the other elements that I put with this when I serve it on my tasting menu, including a homemade Kinako white chocolate and a cherry brandy sauce. So you can keep watching for those and the full finished dish, but right now let's get into the ice cream recipe that's at the heart of it. I'll start with the ingredients because this recipe is so simple that it's important to understand that the ingredients are carefully selected and used in a specific ratio, and if you make any changes to that, then the recipe just isn't going to work as well as it should. I'll explain more about the ingredients as we go through, and the full recipe is going to be written down in the video description. So first off, the base of our ice cream is simply oat milk. Good store-bought oat milk will work, but of course if you want to make your own from scratch, then even better. Oat milk as a base might not sound that exciting, but you'd be amazed how well it works in this recipe. It's got a really nice slight creaminess to it, but what's going to make it so successful here is that we're bringing in these beautiful roasted nut flavours, sweetness, richness and fat from the hazelnut praline that we're going to use with it together to make this beautiful ice cream base. The praline that I'm using is a mixture of 50% hazelnut and 50% caramelised sugar, and for the ice cream's finished sweetness and texture, it's really important that we stick to that ratio. You could make your own praline if you wanted to have total control over the ingredients you're using and you have access to a stone grinder like this. And I'll probably make a video at some point about how to make your own nut pastes and pralines, but for this recipe you could just buy a really good quality one. Our last ingredient is the sugar, and we actually don't have to use very much of this because of that sugar content in the praline. And actually, finally, the very last thing that we want is just a little touch of seasoning. Seasoning sweet elements like chocolates and ice cream can be something that people overlook, but even just a little salt can act as a natural flavour enhancer that can help the ingredients to really shine and come through at their best. So we could just season this by adding a little pinch of salt, but I'm going to add a little tiny touch of white miso to it, which gives me that saltiness, but also a nice little subtle complexity of flavour. Now, to make our ice cream is super easy. Our ingredients all just get combined and then blended together for about 5 minutes. It needs to blend really well to get the ingredients fully combined, really smooth and nicely emulsified together. Then we're ready to freeze the ice cream, and for a good texture we want to churn it as it freezes and to freeze it as fast as possible. For most people that's going to mean using an ice cream machine if possible, and probably the better your ice cream machine the better final texture you're going to get, but obviously use whatever you can get your hands on. But because I have it on hand and it's the way I do all of my ice creams and sorbets, I'm going to freeze mine with liquid nitrogen for the smoothest possible texture. That's just me being a perfectionist and making the most of the fact that I do have access to this, and of course I'm making it for my tasting menu, but you can get great results just using a domestic ice cream machine. Once the ice cream is frozen, you're going to want to firm it up a little bit in the freezer to store it, and then when you serve it, let it warm up just a little bit and temper so it's nice and soft when you scoop it. And then it's perfect to serve just like this, but this is also where I take some extra steps that you also could too. I pipe my churned ice cream into these silicone moulds and then let it firm up in the freezer in them. And then once the ice cream's firmed up, I can store it as those individual portions just at the temperature I want ready to serve it, so that for me in service I can just pull these from the freezer and they're ready to fill with the cherry brandy sauce and serve with my Kinako chocolate. The ice cream itself is already really delicious, but then just pairing it with these other flavours elevates it to another level. So next I'll show you how I make these other elements, but I'll also give you some suggestions for simplified versions too. So on the tasting menu, I'm pairing that ice cream with the flavours of cherry brandy and the nutty light caramel flavours of Kinako, which I used to make this homemade blonde chocolate. I'll start by showing you the Kinako chocolate that I make to serve alongside the ice cream. But again, if this seems too complex, don't worry, I've got a simpler option coming up. So for these, I start off with my Kinako, which is a roasted soybean flour that's often used in Japanese desserts and to coat sweet mochi. If you've seen a few of my other videos, you'll know that I draw quite a lot of influence from Japan, and a visit to Tokyo early on in my career really had quite a strong influence on me. As I mentioned, I'm going to make some chocolate with this Kinako, and I've made videos in the past about the process of making chocolate, which to me is really fascinating. It opens up all of these possibilities for flavours, from making your own sort of more traditional dark chocolates and choosing the varieties of cacao that you might want to work with, to more contemporary versions like this. Normally a white chocolate is made from just 3 ingredients: cocoa butter, sugar and milk powder. But for this version, I'm swapping that milk powder for the roasted Kinako. So all of those ingredients go into my chocolate grinder, and they're going to grind and refine for 48 hours to become completely beautifully smooth. The great thing with swapping out that milk powder for the Kinako is that it's going to give us this beautiful light caramel nutty flavour to the finished chocolate that will pair really well along with the ice cream. But also it means that now this white chocolate is dairy free, so it's suitable for people that can't have lactose and for vegans too. So the whole finished dessert is going to be vegan, but you just would not know that at all unless someone told you. If you wanted to learn more about making chocolate, I'll put links to my videos about that below, and there I go through the process in a lot more detail and talk about the equipment that I use. Now that I've got my homemade Kinako chocolate, I'm gonna temper it, and I won't dwell on that process here either. Again, it's another thing that I have a whole video on, but it's quite a simple process, and the way that I do mine is using a water bath that makes it even simpler. I spread my Kinako chocolate onto these homemade chocolate transfers, and this is a process I'm going to speak more about in a future video, but I have a printer that lets me print my own edible cocoa butter chocolate transfers. So then I can pour my tempered chocolate out onto these and spread it thin. And then when it's set, I can remove the chocolate transfer, and it leaves this pattern in printed cocoa butter on my chocolate. Then I'll break those into pieces and serve them alongside the ice cream to complement its flavours. So for a really simple version, of course if you don't want to go through the process of making your own chocolate, you could just sprinkle some Kinako over the ice cream and maybe put a little bit of chopped chocolate along with it too. Next, for the Cherry Brandy Sauce, I'm going to show you how I make my version, which is, again, probably a little bit more than most people want to do, but I will also show you a simplified version too. First off, I make a cherry juice base by blending cherries with water and sugar and then straining this. And then for the finished sauce, I'm going to want to mix that flavour along with cherry brandy. And you could just mix them together now, that would be your simplest possible option, but it would make for quite a thin sauce. And so that's why I go through this next step. I want to reduce my cherry juice right down so there's as little water content to it as possible, and then when I add my cherry brandy, they're going to mix together to make the right texture of sauce with the intensity of flavour that I want. So I reduce my cherry juice in the Rotavat, something I've featured on this channel before, and basically it's a vacuum distiller which lets me either distill or concentrate flavours at very low temperature. So in this instance, I can concentrate and reduce my cherry juice, but without hardly heating it up above room temperature. That means I preserve the more delicate flavours from the cherries, and I also don't get the browning reactions that you would have if you heated this up to higher temperatures. It keeps it very fresh and intense. You could easily just make a cherry reduction on the stove. It's just because I'm serving this on my tasting menu, I want the flavours to be as clean and intense as possible. And then I'm going to mix my cherry reduction with cherry brandy. And I really want a punch of that alcohol and cherry brandy coming through, so I'm mixing this 1 part cherry reduction to 2 parts cherry brandy. And then that gives me my finished cherry brandy sauce. So this is on my tasting menu at the moment, as I record this at least, and I'll show you how I go about serving it. I can take out portions of the hazelnut ice cream held at the temperature I want, ready to serve it, and place them into a chilled dish. And then I pour in my cherry brandy sauce so it pools in the centre of the ice cream. And then I serve my homemade Kinako white chocolate alongside to go along with and complement the dish. The way that the cherry brandy pools in the center of the ice cream makes this dish eat really nicely and means you get a little bit of the cherry brandy sauce along with the ice cream in every mouthful. And then having the Kinako white chocolate to nibble at alongside whilst the guests are enjoying this, to me is the best way to experience this as a whole dish. So that's the dish as I serve it on my tasting menu, and I've probably focused a bit more on the ice cream here because I think that's probably the thing that most people are likely to make, but thank you for sticking with me right to the end and listening to me talk about the other elements. If you want to see how I make other whole dishes off my tasting menu, I feature quite a few of those on the channel, and then if you're interested in things like making your own chocolate or other frozen desserts, I've made technique videos about those things too. I hope it comes out fantastically if you do make this ice cream, and let me know how you get on if you do. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.